Hello friends, welcome. Friends, on 4th of May 2025, PTI carried a news item. The headline of this news item is High Altitude Platforms Can Provide Secure, Flexible Coverage Compared to Satellites. Telecom Industry Body. Now, what is this telecom industry body? This is COAI. If you look at the synopsis of this article, which says Telecom Industry Body, COAI, suggests high altitude platform as a cost-effective alternative to satellites. These platforms offer secure, flexible coverage. Countries are investing heavily in this technology. COAI urges India to develop a regulatory framework for high-altitude platform operation. This includes spectrum allocation and airspace management. Now, friend, when I saw this article, I was really intrigued. And, there are certain thought processes which came to my mind, which looks like that the actions of the industry body, which is COI, and their current narrative or the statement which they have made, which is carried by PTI, seems contradictory in nature. Because if they are advocating high altitude platform, what they have been advocating in past as regards spectrum management and what they are currently doing to promote low cost FWA, this whole thing, looks quite confusing to me because it looks like that statements are being made without looking at the larger picture and the interest of all the members of the association. And let me tell you, friends, when I make these statements which I make is kind of taking full responsibility what I'm saying. I am not making a statement on a judgmental basis. I will support this with facts, figures, what I'm talking about. So friends, what I'm going to do is I am going to go straight to my presentation, which I have prepared, and we'll go slide by slide, and I'm going to give you references of each and every points which are being spoken about in this slide. And you will understand why it is so critical, right? And that's what we're going to investigate in this presentation. And you will find this video very, very useful because this video is not just about HAPS. HAPS is a very niche technology, right? And I will explain to you what HAPS is. It is about the larger strategy of the industry, which is deployment of 5G spectrum or the 5G technology, as well as low cost FWA, right? So without wasting any further time, let's go and straight to this presentation. So the title of this presentation is COAI's DG support for HAPS opens new possibility. Why? The key thing is delicensing of 6 GHz band. Friends, you know that COAI and its association members have been fighting tooth and nail to auction this full block of 6 GHz band, which is 1200 megahertz for IMT, right? But they have been switching from IMT to Wi-Fi and promoting UBR technology in 5 GHz band as a low-cost, cheap option. And we know that many nations like US have delicensed the 6 GHz band Wi-Fi. So as I go through the presentation, the contradictions that the narratives which are being spelled out will be clearly visible. So rather than jumping ahead of myself, let's go step by step through the presentation and things will become very, very clear. Now, what is HAPS and what is a satellite? How it is different from satellite technology? Now, HAPS is something like this. You have got some weather balloon or something which can be hanged in the sky, right? Which can withstand the gravity. Now, satellite, what happens is satellite is able to withstand gravity because it is moving around the earth in a circular motion. So it's continuously in falling path. So once it is in a falling path, there is a centrifugal force which kind of balances the gravitational force, and therefore the satellite remains in orbit. Whereas in case of HAPS, what happens is that it has to be something like a weather balloon, which has to be filled with hydrogen gas or helium gas, and it has to be pushed up in the sky with a payload which will have an antenna, and it can start disseminating signals from this place and will cover an area maybe around, you can say that the area can be around 20 kilometers radius, like that. Whereas satellite can cover very, very large area, 200 kilometers, square kilometers, 300, depending upon what is the height of the satellite from the surface of the earth. If it is geostationary, then it will be much, much larger. If it is LEO satellite, then it is 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers square. Now, HAPS can be deployed anytime you want, right? It is completely under the jurisdiction of the country. Whereas satellite, you know that you need a lot of permission from international bodies because the orbital slots have to be opened up and then the frequency assignment has to be made. So there are a lot of regulatory things and it takes a lot of time to deploy a satellite, where HAPS can be deployed immediately in an area where you need. For example, if there is a disaster which is taking place, or let's say if the military operation is happening where you need a immediate communication, and you can shoot up this weather balloon in the sky, and then you can have ground level terminals which can be talking to the weather balloon. People can communicate, right? So that's the concept between HAPS and satellite. So HAPS can't be deployed in a very large scale throughout the country because of these challenges, because these devices will have a lot of issues in making sure that they are properly controlled. Because when you are at a 20-kilometer height above the surface of the earth, there could be weather phenomena which can push the balloon here and there, and it becomes very difficult to contain these balloons, right? Now, as I already told you, what is HAPS? High altitude platform station, 20 kilometers altitude, solar drones, air-shaped balloon, etc., right? Which can provide communication. It provides temporary, tactical or emergency communication, best suited for military and disaster recovery, right? If and remote coverage. And it is complementary, it is not a replacement to satellite. Now, how HAPS is different from satellite? Now, satellite LEO and MEO satellites provides global coverage, long operation, stable life in the orbits. HAPS are regional, means even in much smaller areas, subject to weather limited endurance, which I've already explained to you. HAPS lacks a proper optimal propulsion system, because as I told you that you need to fight the gravity, right? And also the forces of weather, right? There could be wind force. So there has to be some propulsion system to make this device stable on the sky. If it moves away, drifts away, then there is no point in, these stations will not be able to communicate properly. So you have to keep this, at a particular location. Whereas satellites are revolving, and as I told you that, centrifugal force, there could be some thrusters to make some orbital correction. But HAPS requires a solid propulsion system to be able to contain it, and it is not sustainable because of these lateral and the gravitational force which continuously keeps disturbing the location of these devices, these balloons, right? So HAPS lacks proper and optimal propulsion, and it is very challenging to sustain it over a long period of time, and therefore it must be carefully coordinated, not suitable for continuous nationwide operation and service delivery, which I explained to you. Now, COAI position in 2025, which is the article which I showed you right now. This is the article, which to me was quite strange, because this article talks about what benefit the HAP technology is and how, it should be, deployed immediately, and the government of India should come out with a, if you look at this, government of India should come out with a clear-cut strategy. See, Department of Telecommunications need to identify, allocate specific bands, etc. So this has been talked about, right? Which to me may not, it really, I was surprised when I saw this article. But even though I was surprised, it gives me a new insight as to how this phenomena or this kind of push which COAI is making can be leveraged for their own interests. That's the whole purpose of this presentation. So let's go to this PDF again, or this PPT again. So COAI advocates HAPS for secure, cost-effective, flexible coverage. Cities advantage in disaster zone, military. So you need to be ready for all kinds of disaster. It can happen in a city, it can happen in a village, it can happen in a remote area, anywhere, right? And it is pushing for regulatory and spectrum framework to enable HAPS. Now, given this background which I explained, we also need to understand that there is a FWA, fixed wireless push, by companies like Reliance Jio and Bharti. And FWA is scaling up. But the biggest challenge in FWA is the cost of the end devices. And 5G devices are really costly. So Jio is also pushing for UBR. UBR is unlicensed broadband radio in 5 GHz spectrum, using a chunk of 405 MHz of spectrum, right? In order to drive the cost of FWA. So, and it reports 1 gigabits of symmetrical speed using Wi-Fi physical layer, and it is comparable to the 5G stack, which they are using in the 3.5 gigahertz band. You can see the Jio's public announcement, which they did in the time when their results were out. So you will see this. Here is this. It says that, where is it? It was there, I remember it was there, but anyway, it basically talks about, yeah, you see, you can get 1 gigahertz of uplink and downlink, right? So you can pause the video and have a look at this, right? And then let's go and see what we are talking about. India is a price sensitive market and favors and it kind of is going and gravitating towards unlicensed spectrum over costly IMT based 5G spectrum, and possibility in one of my video also I speculated that it is also possible for to be used in 26 gigahertz band, this whole Wi-Fi physical layer, with a concept called LBR. It is UBR, LBR, licensed broadband radio, where the full 1 gigahertz of spectrum of Reliance and 800 megahertz spectrum of Bharti can be leveraged to deploy Wi-Fi. Otherwise, that spectrum will be lying waste, which I have already spoken about in one of my videos. But why 6 gigahertz band makes sense for HAPS and what COAI stands have been in past? That's what we are going to discuss here. Now, HAPS can have various frequency band, starting from 6 gigahertz band, and all the satellite bands can be opened up for HAPS because HAPS and satellite can share spectrum with each other, right? But 6 gigahertz band is uniquely poised because it's a low frequency band. It has got 1200 megahertz of bandwidth available. Let me show you the band structure of 6 gigahertz band. So I did an article. If you look at this, is the band structure of 6 gigahertz band. It starts from 5925. Let me just zoom in a bit so that you can look. 5925 megahertz to 7125 megahertz, right? So this is the overall band, and you will see that there are many countries which have delicensed the full spectrum. You see, this full 1200 megahertz spectrum has been delicensed, right? So, which is region 2, America, Saudi Arabia, Korea, Japan. They have delicensed the full band, and some of the countries have delicensed this block of spectrum, and they are basically going for IMT in this block of spectrum, right? Which is 6425 to 7125, right? So this is the way the 6 gigahertz band looks like. Now, 6 gigahertz band, if it is delicensed fully, then there will be a lot of advantage, and we are going to talk about that. Because this band is less rain attenuation effective, ideal for HAPS to device communication. Because when you are talking to a device, it has to be an optimal band. It cannot be very high frequency band, because if you are going to use a very high frequency band like 26 gigahertz or 28 gigahertz band, then device has to be pointed to the base station which is hanging in the sky. Otherwise, the device is not going to receive the signal properly, because what happens is that as the frequency increases, the beam size becomes very narrow. And the beams become very narrow, it has to be pointed to the device, right? So this antennas have to be pointing to the HAPS base station which is in the sky properly to able to receive. But if it is a low frequency band, the beams become wider and it is easy to receive those beams either in a fixed terminal or a handheld device. And we also know that globally this 6 gigahertz band is being used for Wi-Fi, the advanced Wi-Fi system like 6G and 7 ecosystem. And it's a perfect balance for range, capacity and cost effectiveness. Now, policy contradiction. This is very important. Now, I'll show you certain thing which happened. So there is a process in India called National Frequency Allocation Plan. And during the time, in year 2000, this issue of 6 gigahertz HAPS was discussed. But at that time, COAI opposed opening of spectrum in 6 gigahertz band for HAPS. Why? Because they wanted this full band for IMT. Now, I'll show you the document because it is important to look at this document. So this document, if you look at it, you will find this document in the website. So this is a summary record of 5th and final meeting of the Working Group 3 for NFAP 2022. And if you go down below, and you will find here COAI also participated in this meeting, including all the other industry associations and companies. Now, if you go down here, you will see that there were certain proposals which were made as IND footnote, because footnote is a very important thing. Footnote means it gives an exception for deployment of certain things, even though a certain band is opened up for certain other purpose. So there was a footnote which are not considered, right? And there was a number which was supposed to be given for the footnote. So what you read this, it says that the proposal was that to open up 6440 to 6520 HAPS to ground direction means downlink, and 6560 to 6640 uplink, which is ground to HAP direction. But this proposal was not considered because this frequency band is considered only for IMT. So it is quite understood that those members who participated in this discussion might not have supported. You see, Airtel, BIF, COAI, Ericsson, Reliance Jio, Nokia. So everybody was involved, even IITs and even DOT guys and different type of association was involved, right? So if there was a majority support for this deployment, this proposal, which I showed you right here, then it would have passed. The footnote would have got included in the NFAP. But since it was rejected, because it was band was for reserved for IMT, right? So let's go to that slide. So you will see that the member companies, so COAI opposed, my understanding is COAI opposed the use of 6 GHz during NFAP 2022 for HAPS, citing IMT needs. Otherwise, if COI is a large association, it has got member companies. If it was pushing, then there is a likelihood of that would have got included because they are the heavyweights. Others are very, very small companies, really don't matter. What operators really matter. Now, if you look at COI's article, right, which I pointed out, they are now promoting HAPS. Having rejected the deployment of HAPS in 6 GHz band, now they are promoting HAPS for national important, yet they block its idle spectrum at the time when the NFAP was getting developed. Member companies are now, then another thing, the member companies of COAI are shifting away from IMT towards FWA using unlicensed band, which I told you Jio is already doing UBR. And the main reason why Jio is doing UBR is basically to promote low cost FWA, because FWA carrying cost is pretty high and the tariff is 800 rupees per month. So you can't really have high cost 5G end devices to be bundled along with those tariffs, because there will be no way they will be able to recover the cost of the device. So Wi-Fi becomes a very important consideration. So the question now is, why blocks have access to 6 GHz band if it is truly strategic? Right. So what is the win-win situation for everybody? Let's talk about that. Win-win situation is that, like, if you have seen my article here, which I showed you just now, that there are many nations which have delicensed the full 1200 megahertz of 6 GHz band, right? So it is not that it is going to be unique if India delicensed this band, right? So if India delicensed 6 GHz band for Wi-Fi 7, UBR and HAPS, it is going to be a win-win situation for everybody. Why? Because there are 1200 megahertz spectrum. In 5 GHz band is only 405 megahertz of spectrum, right? So you get a large number of block of spectrum and you can drive, channel size for Wi-Fi of 320 megahertz, multiple of them, which you can't do in case of 405, where you have a very limitation of 160 megahertz, only 2 channels. Here you can do multiple of 320 megahertz of channel, which will enhance your broadband capability significantly. So it will drive affordability for FWA, enable disaster communication, because you don't know where the disaster would be. So if you are going to have a certain portion of your spectrum for HAPS, which is an international, harmonized spectrum, and if it is used for Wi-Fi, then, and you are also going to be using the 6 GHz for your Wi-Fi FWA, then you will not be using HAPS all the time, right? So most of the time, your Wi-Fi usage is going to be protected. Only in case of emergency in some location, HAPS will be deployed. It is not going to be deployed throughout the country. So you will have a win-win situation for deployment of HAPS, as well as using the full spectrum band for Wi-Fi to leverage low-cost Wi-Fi ecosystem for driving the FWA price down. So it serves both the industry goal as well as public communication reliance. So the conclusion here is very simple. HAPS is useful, but only with the right kind of spectrum, because you can't drive the spectrum too high, because it is not going to be useful because of the reason I told you. As the spectrum goes high, the beam width becomes very, very narrow. So it is very difficult to point those devices to the base station which are hanging to the sky. You need a beam which is quite wide, which is only possible in low frequency band. Typically 6 GHz is the ideal band. Delicensed 6 GHz create a flexibility and reduces cost for all stakeholders. Why flexibility? You can use it for UBR unlicensed with higher capable Wi-Fi technology, rather than, because you are already drifting away from IMT because you want the FWA cost to die. And there is also a possibility of 26 GHz band for using for Wi-Fi. So why not make a band which is close to 5 GHz? And since all the development work that you have done on 5 GHz can be ported to 6 GHz for Wi-Fi, so your Wi-Fi strategy of connecting 100 million homes, right, is going to be fulfilled. If you are going to auction this for IMT, then what will happen? You will get a block only of 300 megahertz of auction spectrum will be auctioned. Because if you look at the refarming article which I did recently, I did an article of refarming of spectrum, and you will see that India is likely to open 300 megahertz. See, 300 megahertz is released from 600 megahertz and 600 gigahertz band. So if 300 megahertz is released, then one operator is going to get only 100 megahertz maximum. 100 megahertz, you can't be deploying Wi-Fi. You can opt to do 5G. You have to do 5G. So all your strategy of going a low cost for FWA using Wi-Fi is going to be completely defeated, because in 100 megahertz, you cannot have a Wi-Fi deployment of even a carrier size of 80 megahertz. So your bitrate is going to be, your data throughput is going to become very, very narrow. So it is better to use it for full delicensed, because doing auction spectrum will be costly, first of all. Second, you can't deploy Wi-Fi in a small block of spectrum, because 300 megahertz is only being made available unlicensed. If it is going to be delicensed, then the chances of making the full 1200 megahertz is very high, because unlicensed spectrum does not require protection from other operations which are happening in this band, and that's why only 300 megahertz have been opened up for auction. It aligns with the Geo-UBR strategy for cheaper FWA rollout in India, and we should let our spectrum strategy reflect the ground and practical narrative which the operators are pushing, and the COAI member, and it should satisfy the COAI members' requirement. So friends, that's all in this video. I thought of using this article, which I found it very, very interesting, given what action COAI has taken in past to block HAPS in the 6 gigahertz band. And the 6 gigahertz band strategy, if it is going to be for IMT spectrum, then it contradicts the operator strategy to do low cost FWA, because one hand the 5G FWA prices are high, and then you are going to get only 100 megahertz of spectrum. So if you are going to open the full 1200 megahertz spectrum, you will be able to do Wi-Fi and the better Wi-Fi technology, and you will be able to replicate what you have achieved in the 5 gigahertz band in a band which is quite near and similar in nature, with very, very large quantum of spectrum. 5 gigahertz has only 405 megahertz spectrum. 1200 megahertz spectrum is available in 6 gigahertz band. So you will be able to meet all your objective of FWA, enabling the country with high bit rate or high speed internet. That's all I want to say, friends. I thought of using this opportunity to give you what is in our interest and how the operators are kind of going in a contradictory direction. On one hand, they are doing something, and on the other hand, they are basically making a completely different policy narrative. So we need to have our narrative and our practical actions completely resonating with each other, so that everybody's interests are served. Thank you, friends, for your time, and I hope that you like this video, and I'll come back with a new video and a new topic next time. Thanks for listening till the end.